Okay, well, I don't know how much of this we'll get through, because there's a lot, and I don't want to put everyone to sleep after what we ate. But I do want to cover some stuff of what's, over the last season from 2007, I worked in what was called the ARC, and worked on the West Coast churches. There was about 800 that I oversaw, and then I moved into a national role working with all the churches in Foursquare. And there are trends I saw, and I went to a lot of different seminars and different church trend things. And there's some stuff I've distilled that I thought it might be helpful for us to talk about and information to give you. I know the average size of a Foursquare church is about 60, so not everyone's thinking, okay, how do I go to multi-site and buy a bigger campus? And in fact, probably that group isn't in the room who are thinking that way. But I really think it's significant to know where church is going, because the trends that will impact even smaller churches in thinking out of the box and thinking the way the Holy Spirit's moving the Church of Christ as a whole in America, I think it'll help inform you to go with some things. So go ahead and start the slideshow. So, big surprise. One thing I have learned, and I think everyone in this room knows, is that change is constant. The minute we think it's not, it changes on us, and it becomes a new norm, right? Has anyone not experienced that? Okay, so good to know no one's lived in a hole. Because reality is just a constant change. And so all we have to do is plan to be constantly challenged by the Lord. Because I do think, back to just individually, who Jesus brings into our churches, we'll discover that every one of them is unique. They're not going to fit a mold or a model. I mean, there may be things we could do for structure to bring them through our system and develop great intern programs and great discipleship programs and great kids programs and great adult programming. But all those programming are going to always run the risk of not fitting everyone who's showing up. And trusting the Holy Spirit that if they don't fit here, they'll go somewhere else. But they won't leave so broken that they go nowhere else, right? That's my fear as a leader. That whatever I design will turn off enough somebody that they'll just give up on Jesus, like Ken Robinson did, right? I don't want to do that. I'm really scared of God that that's what I'll do. And so, anyway, so that's one of the realities. Go ahead, next slide. So when we look at change, what are some keys to fruitful training? Don't try to write all this down, because you got this, right, Rick? They could pull this presentation down and look at it. But just whatever thoughts come at you and whatever might help you. Change will happen. It will be unexpected. Duh. Innovate. So constantly, let's throw out sacred cows. Not to borrow from Hindus, but it's important not to have sacred cows as Christian. Develop new wineskins to receive new wine. Social equity is a key term that's being used in church life right now when you look at it in America. What is social equity? It's the ability to bring cooperation to lead people and organizations in your community to harness time, talent, and treasury to a greater common good. What does that mean? What you're doing is impacting the community you live in, right? Why is that significant? Because the community is being helped less and less by other people, right? There's less social help groups going on. There's less government funding to help communities develop whatever they're doing to help their community than there ever has been in our country, right? So there's less and less resource that's being tapped into those local communities. And so you see people and churches and leaders who are having an incredible impact and growth, not just through the typical ways of church growth, of designing a better program, preaching a better message, being more inspiring with what you share, having a better worship set, doing it the right order. I mean, the stuff you kind of think about when you think about church. But what they're doing is, for example, there's a pastor in the Northwest who goes up and volunteers to announce at football games. He's on the mic. Right? Why? Nobody else would do it. Did he know football? No, but he just wanted to help his high school and the kids that were there. And so this sense of social equity is significant that he, one, heard what the community needed, and two, he stepped up to help. And there's different things. There's Christmas programs you do, there's giveaways. We saw it, if you came in this morning, there was a food bank going on, right? So it's all building of social equity. You're all investing in the community. It's not necessarily return, it's helps ministry. But what's happening is the government and the businesses around you notice. They see the church as something more significant and impactful than just a place where people are coming into to get out of the rain. Right? So this is in the vernacular that's out there in churches right now. What type of social equity is our church building in our community? So take some time, not now, but just take some time to think about what type of social equity does my church create? Who knows what we're doing? Who knows the impact of what we're doing? And most importantly, God, what are you calling us to do, and what are you calling us to impact? Does that make sense? Okay. Expect global diversity, especially in this community or in Southern California. We all are going to be globally diverse, right? There's going to be different races, there's going to be different languages, there's going to be different people, there's going to be different styles, there's going to be different economic status. It's going to come into our church, right? Okay, so we expect that. Expect that. So if your core church is one type of people group, what typically happens? You'll probably offend some people in that one group at one point in your life because we're human and we're not, the word is inerrant and infallible, but us pastors are not, right? We make mistakes. We say things we shouldn't. Like I said several in the last couple days. But it's one baptism, it's one Jesus, it's one salvation, it's one truth that we're preaching, and to invite people into that to be with us. Does that make sense? Okay, next slide. So growth trends. Most church growth is really driven by population growth. When you look at historically and even modern day where church plants are going on, it's population growth driven. New housing growth translates to new church plants. When you look at where new churches are planting, it's where there's new houses starting. Established churches must reinvent population as ethnicity shifts. What does that mean? There's a community that's white that becomes a different ethnicity. Does the church change? No. Right, let's protect ourselves. Let's stay white in this community even if it's no longer a white community. Let's stay black in this community even if it's no longer a black community. Let's stay Hispanic in this community even though it's now a Korean community. Right, so things change around us. How does our church change and reflect the community we live in? Is that fair? Okay. So Americans move around more than any other culture. The reality is in 24 years, the average American family moves 3 times, but 2 times significant cross-state borders. Right now, that's the trend. So I grew up at Church on the Way in terms of my church growth. And so when Pastor Jack used to talk, we'd have people there who had been there for 50 or 40 years and part of that community, who had been committed and growing in the San Fernando Valley, who never left and raised their kids and grew up and their grandkids were living close by. Is that the culture we live in now? No, right? So even if you live in LA and you have a family who stays there, there's a good chance their kids can't afford to live here, right? So they'll be in a different community. And then over time, older people, as we have grandkids, which I don't yet, I still have kids, but if we have grandkids, what do we tend to do? Follow them, right? So it's kind of a different mindset in our culture of what happens to people. What does that mean? It's really hard to develop long-term tithers and givers who are going to commit to the church and the vision. It's a different thing you're building. Does that make sense? Okay. Am I losing you? Is this helpful at all? Okay. Okay. So just understand who left your community, who left your neighborhood. What does it look like? What does your leadership team look like? What does your church council look like? If you go to a local community event, whatever it is, the high school football game that's locally played, is that what your church looks like when you're at that high school event? Is that what your leadership team looks like when you're at that event? I mean, I think it's important as we look at social equity and just to reflect even what we talked about in Acts chapter 6, the deacons being raised up and that they were Greek. Something changed and they began to reflect the people who were in the community. Okay? So what's in a name? Geographic identifier is not the norm. So it used to be First Church of Van Nuys. It used to be the Anaheim, is this number 1, 2? What is the rock? Is it Anaheim number 1 or? Yes. Okay, the First Anaheim Foursquare Church. That used to be like the name of the church. It used to be called that. I mean, we would talk about just the geographic identifier would be the name of the church. Church today doesn't do that. It reflects something different. It has a name. It has something that's significant. Most common words that are in the name right now, besides church, are community, first, life, and fellowship. Again, just look at churches all across America. They tend to have that word or those words in the name of their community, the name of their church. Next slide. So campus trends. What's happening with campuses across the country? Multi-site expansion is happening all over. There's about 3,000 multi-site churches. There's about 1,500 or 1,300 mega churches. So mega churches are kind of waning, and what's happening is multi-site is happening more and more. Okay, that's a trend that's happening. 2/3 of multi-sites are denominationally connected. This is just data, but I'll read it quick. 48% have video teaching. 41% have a live person. 11% rotate teaching between live and people. 60% hand-deliver a DVD each week. 90% have internet delivery or satellite that come in. 1/3 exists by merging with a struggling church. So what a lot of churches are doing as they look at expansion isn't to go rent a building and start a new church. They look at churches that are going under around them. You know, that Lutheran church used to be down the road. They need to sell their building. What if we moved our community there? Or even more importantly, you know, that Methodist church, there's about 20 people left. What if we just merged with them took over the bills? We don't have to buy the building, but we just form one community with that church. So a lot of interdenominational stuff is happening, which I think is very inspiring to see the body of Christ come together that way. There's strong growth in birthing churches. There's strong growth in multi-sites right now. And then let's go to the next slide, because I have more about the churches. Okay, 90% success for multi-sites. There's about 10% that close in 5 years. Okay, what's the average closure rate of a church plant in 3 years? I mean, ballpark, it's 60 to 70%. They don't make it, right? So with multi-site, 90% stay open on multi-site. Most begin multiple sites at home campus. So what does that mean? They tend to stay near their own community. They don't look to plant all over. So we may have a campus here, we may have a church a few miles away, may have a campus 10 miles away. It's not looking at going and planting kind of like it used to be in the old days of, okay, we're going to plant St. Louis now, we're going to plant New York City, we're going to plant Florida, it's not that type of expansion, it's more kind of creating hubs for people to go to. There's a trend on the differentials that the mission value and community side, the social equity side is the same in the different multi-site campuses, but what we see stronger is that there's more evangelism in multi-sites, but there's a stronger tithe base and discipleship in the core facility. And so it's really important, if you get to a point of thinking multi-site, that how do you maintain the same values, because value drift is really easy. And then you have a church plant or church split, which again isn't necessarily bad, because that leader could go form its own community. Funding that happens, the original campus that's planting it tends to fund about 40% of the budget. There's a 12% budget for special offering to plant the site, and then a capital campaign that generates about 24%. Make sense? This is too much data. Give me some feedback. Okay. Where? Vast majority are in schools. The number one site for multi-site campuses are to rent an auditorium at a school. in the United States, especially in places like Hawaii where you can't buy land. You plant it in school. 33% merge or acquire struggling congregations. We talked about that already. 85 are less than 30 minutes apart. 45% are under 15 minutes apart when you look at multi-site. So again, there's just not the geographic breadth necessarily in a multi-site approach. Okay. Who? The average core launch for multi-site is 174 people. This is across the United States. The median is 75 people. Core team is a mature tithing Christian with a missional goal. So in other words, when a campus is launched, you don't just launch Joe because he really has a heart to go reach Burbank. You launch Joe and these 10 to 15 families who are going to bring their tithe, bring their commitment, give their understanding, their discipline in Christ to that community and begin to plug it in. So churches aren't just sending out a leader, they're sending out a team. And typically that's a mature team who kind of gets it, that are going to be part of the core, and who understand the core values and everything that's about the church. You need very strong leadership at a satellite campus. The average age of a campus pastor isn't a young person, they're 41. They are usually birthed from within the congregation. Churches aren't looking to hire outside people to come in and birth a multi-site campus. Campus team reports to the campus pastor, not the launching pastor. So pretty immediately, those campuses tend to develop their own entity, their own leadership style. That pastor who's running the campus leads that campus and has the autonomy and the authority to do it. Most self-identify as multi-ethnic. So what I mean by that is those multi-site campuses tend to be really multi-generational and multi-ethnic. In other words, they're not caught in one ethnic group. Even if the core group was, let's say it's a very white church in a wider community, but they move into a more ethnic diverse group, they tend to be a more ethnic diverse church, which is, I think, positive. And at 1/4 have a second language. So in other words, they launch and they immediately start in Spanish or Vietnamese or Tagalog or something to reach a community they're trying to reach. Make sense? Okay, keep going. Internet church. So Rick talked about this. He talked about Hillsong, which has a great site. Another one I'd encourage you to go look at is Redeemer Presbyterian, New York City. Awesome internet church approach. They have a great app that you could download for free. Timothy Keller is the pastor of the church. But a lot of really cool things are happening. There's not just podcasts. There's teaching online, there's worship online, there's prayer requests online. There's chat and fellowship online for believers to come together. There's Bible reading plans that you could download to stay part of the community and what's happening. There's small groups that meet online within chat rooms or Moodle sites. So there's that type of connection. There's kids ministry that happens. So you could log in to your parent group and sit in church, but your kids could log into their different kids that are going on, different kids curriculum that's going on. There's Skype counseling that's offered. They actually have events. They let there be baptisms in your bathtub or your jacuzzi or your swimming pool that you could do at home, led by a leader through Skype. Okay? So there's stuff happening that isn't bound by brick and mortar, that's really reaching people who can't get there. So does this help people? Yeah, because some ethnicities aren't going to be reflective in a church. We have in Foursquare, we have a lot of Indonesian churches in pockets of the country that aren't big enough to really establish or own their own church. But we could connect them online, and you could build a core group of people of that ethnicity and that background, led and overseen by mentors, to really bring about a change in that community, and then birth a church off of the online outreach that you do. Right? Is that inspiring? Okay, everyone stand up for a minute. Yeah, just stand up, everybody. Everyone stand up. Yeah, put your arms up and just stretch, because we're all falling asleep. Right? Okay. You good? Okay, now we're going to run some laps. So go ahead and, no, I'm kidding. Okay, online giving. How important is that? One, it has to be safe. Do people know that it's safe to give online? Do they trust what you have set up online? Number two, 40 to 60% of your giving, depending on your community, but 40 to 60% of the giving in most churches happens online. Okay? So if you don't take online giving, especially as Rick said, the new generation's coming up, they're not going to give. There's going to be no way to build resource. Okay, next site. So property trends. This is more of, again, just what's happening. Impact of buying online, 2-day shipping, everything that's happening with Amazon means there's a lot of big box retailers who've closed. So a lot of leases have been broken by those retailers, especially as there's been a lot of bankruptcies in the retail sector, which means you could lease buildings and at a competitive rate in a lot of communities. Is that starting to change? Yeah. And it's still a lot of money if you could afford to rent an old Walmart or whatever. I mean, it's not like it's going to be cheap. But that's one way churches are looking to expand and get into property now. Leases are a different option. It used to be that we only look at buying, because why would you lease something and invest money and then not have a return because you don't own it? But it actually makes sense because communities are changing so much. People and population shifts are happening so quickly that when you look at a 20 to 30 year lease, there's a good chance you won't be here in 20 to 30 years anyway. You'll probably move with the people and move with the communities. So, and especially when you start going multi-site, it makes sense to really lease multiple sites rather than buy any one and invest a lot of upfront funds. Does that make sense? Okay, so that, again, these are trends that are out there. So I'm not arguing for it, I'm just saying this is why I think we see this trend that's happening in church. So there is growth in inner city that's happening in terms of church life. There's growth in mature areas, there's growth in suburbs. Small towns are growing. Smaller your town is, the more that social equity is looked at. Because the smaller town has people who talk and say, hey, did you hear what that pastor's doing? Did you hear what that group is doing? You know they're having a Christmas thing, they're going to all the apartments in the area and giving free toys. That says something really significant in a smaller community. So depending on your community, that's going to be significant. Anyway, the millennial generation. Polls show that it has a strong desire to go suburban. So I think the sociological trend that we're seeing right now in population movements is we used to, you know how everyone's saying everyone wants to move to downtown LA now and get into a loft? Well, that's working until they're about 30 and they have a kid because now they want to move out. And that's happening across the country. I'm talking about LA just because I know LA a little bit. But across the country, this move to the urban center tends to leave once children come. And those even the millennials, even the 20-somethings, even the out-of-college people, they tend to want to move to having more space, more security, more safety, somewhere to raise their family. So there is that trend still to move suburban. Okay. Next slide. Matrix of social equity. Community serving, I think we've talked about this. And where do we focus? Is it internal focus? You know, what Ken Robinson talked about, do we try to break out and release people to go do stuff, or do we just try to bring people in and keep them safe? You know, how do we partner missionally with other entities, other ministries? You know, let's say you really want to go after the high schools and do something significant in the high schools in your community. You could try to do that through your youth pastor. But you could also look at what Young Life's doing or some other ministries and try to partner with them. There might be some ethnic ministries that are happening that are really reaching a certain group, like Hispanic youth or different ethnic groups. Maybe you partner with them and try to do something together. Open up your building, let them be there, let them have gatherings there, and look at those partnerships. That's happening more and more. It used to be, again, churches did everything themselves. Now we see a lot of partnership. Again, I'm generalizing for the entire country, but we see a lot of partnerships of ministries, parachurch ministries, and churches coming together to reach a common missional goal. which again is the body of Christ coming together for one purpose. So that's a good thing. Does it always work? No, right? It's going to get messy. You're going to get in arguments. You're going to fight about turf. You're going to fight about who's in control. But if there's more people come to Jesus, amen, it's worth it. So, so thinking networks, thinking coalitions, thinking partnerships, that's happening a lot. Thinking about food banks and what's happening out there. Do you partner with different missions that are reaching the community? Do you partner with different feed the poor areas that are already doing things? Do you connect with different English as second language groups and offer it through your church? Do you let AAA come, not AAA, AA come in and do 12-step programs at your church? That's happening a lot. Celebrate Recovery, there's also partnering with AA. So how do you think and how do you approach it? Depends on your community, but what's happening is a trend, there's more partnerships. It's less about the church doing everything itself. Churches are globally connected with missions, so you see a lot of, we have an incredible missions department with FMI. They do an remarkable, if Jim Scott was here, what's remarkable about Foursquare and what it does with missions is that they're invested in changing nations. So they go in with a strategy, not just to have an event that reaches a certain amount of people, though we'll do that, but the goal is to form churches that are going to form more churches that are going to grow a denomination within a country. And so we have some parts of the world where Foursquare is the largest denomination in that country. Nigeria, I think, is one. Cambodia is another one. And so it's that strategy, not just to have an event that transforms people, but to use that to springboard churches and church growth and denominational growth. And then educate that group in that community and release it. And it's a really remarkable testimony to what Jesus has done through FMI. So anyway, that whole global connection, let's say you have an ethnicity around you. I mean, this is, what's funny is in a place like Miami, where there's a lot of Portuguese moving in, well, what we discovered was that the Portuguese Foursquare Church was sending hundreds of missionaries to Miami to plant churches. So churches in Miami or the district in that area could have thought, well, I just need to go and plant my own churches. But it's certainly more effective to partner with the National Foursquare Church in Brazil and plant with them into Miami Portuguese pastors who are moving there and immigrating there, right? So it's a different world. Is the United States a major sender or receiver of missionaries right now? Receiver. Yeah, we receive more missionaries than we send out into the world right now. Yeah. And so find out who's coming in, right? I mean, look around you and see what's happening with that. Next slide. Again, are you building a brand, planning the gospel? The reason I said that is because younger generation tends to really know the non-authentic relationships or branding, or anytime we get too savvy with ourselves, I think it'll really not impact that generation. There's just not a lot of trust of structure, of being marketed to, of being manipulated. So it's just something to be aware of. There's a racial and ethnic diversity. When you go to a ball game, again, is it reflected in what we see there? Leadership team, church council. Do we really think next generation technology? And Rick hit it great, but how savvy are we at reaching Twitter, at reaching, even Facebook is old technology at this point. But everything new that's happening and reaching those generations. And just to encourage you guys, does there anyone who's not on Facebook? Right? Don't be shy. It's not bad, right? Raise your hand if you're not. Okay, is there any reason you can't be? Why not learn it? I know Rick never wanted to learn it, and that he did. But I think just to encourage everyone, if there's something that's moving in that way, just for yourself, press into it to see what's there and start building relationships, because I think it'll challenge you in good ways. My mom, I'm very proud of her. She's 71 years old. She got a laptop 3 years ago which she had a lot of trouble with because all sorts of spyware downloaded onto it and stuff like that. But since then, she's got an iPhone, which she's figured out, and then she just got an iPad, a mini iPad, 2 months ago. And now she's watching Netflix and Hulu and doing all sorts of stuff. So it's really cool. But she needs her glasses because it's small. Yeah. Really important about the web, especially if you're over 50, kind of the moment of truth for most people visiting your church was when they walked in the front door. There's a thought that the moment of truth is when people drive by and see your billboard. Right now, the moment of truth, the zero moment, is your website. Okay? That is the first point of judgment people are going to make today about whether they come to your church. So just go to your website. If you don't have a website, you probably should. But if you have a website, go to it, or ask your grandkids to go to it, or ask your kids to go to it, and say, hey, would you want to come to this place if you went here? Does this inspire you? And just ask those questions, do surveys. Because that is a determination of whether people show up right now. That's just the reality of it. Okay. Next slide. So financially, again, Rick's covered this, so I don't have to cover all of that. But a big point is transparency is key. What's that mean? Put up your church budget. Tell what you've spent. Show what you give in salaries. I don't mean don't show what you get paid, but show your salaries percentage. Show what you pay for your property expenses. I mean, put up a budget that people go, okay, I understand how the church is spending money. People actually want to know that, to trust that where they're giving, good things are happening. For you as a pastor, if you're a senior pastor especially, who knows your salary? And what do you run that by with people? Who knows that? Does the church council know it? If we have church council in the room, and Rick, do you do church council training too? Yeah, one of the big things we push with church councils is, are you taking care of your pastor? Are they working so hard? Are they not putting money in their retirement account? Are they not planning for the future the same way you would if you worked for Walmart or if you worked for any corporation out there? Church councils have to really protect their pastor to make sure they do that. So transparency is really important. I was on a church council, and that pastor didn't want to disclose salary of several people, and I ended up stepping off the council because I thought, if you don't trust me enough to share that, then I don't want to be a council member here. That's just not authentic. This isn't a non-Foursquare church, so it wasn't a council. It was a elder board. It was an EV Free Church. Anyway, so again, all those things are important. Try not to make, especially if you're a senior leader or part of an executive team, you try not to make definitive decisions yourself. If you're thinking about Christmas bonuses, run that through your council. Run it through what you're doing. Make sure a lot of people are part of the conversation. Trust those you've raised up or God's raised up to be in the church. Make sense? Okay. Annual reports have to be honest and public. You got to put up the money, show what you're doing. 990s are not required for corporations, for nonprofits. Most churches that are larger are posting 990s now. Does anyone know what a 990 is? No? It's a form that 501c3s post their financial information. Typically, why churches don't is you have to disclose the 5 highest paid people on the form. And it's on a public site, and anyone could pull it up, and the press could pull it up. But if you don't, it brings a point of question that starts coming through. There's even ministries like I'm blank, Wall Watchers, or anyway, who go through and try to say these entities, these churches, these parachurches, these evangelism ministries aren't honest with what they make. They're not reporting information. You don't know what's going on. And they're personal jets. There's all sorts of stuff. So again, just avoid all that. Be transparent. We don't have to hide it. It is what it is, right? And again, what Rick said, payroll taxes are huge. please, don't ever not pay payroll taxes. And if you do payroll, don't do them, give it to a payroll service. There's no reason for any church to do their own payroll and risk what might happen if that's going on. Next slide. Outward focus is, again, really important in churches. Interns and residents. We saw a bunch of interns in here yesterday. Can you have interns if you have a church of 50? Yeah, right? It doesn't have to be because it's a large church that you have an intern program. You could have interns, discipleship, training. It could be 2 people that the senior pastor is committed to and has a shadowing relationship with, right? It could be 2 people that the women's minister is raising up and investing in to women because they're committed to do that and they go through certain training. It could be someone following the youth pastor around. Interns and residence is something in Foursquare, which is for life graduates, but that's not based off of either budget or off of how big of a church you are, because you don't have to pay them. It doesn't have to be a full-time position, but it could be a 10 or 20-hour-a-week commitment that those younger people make to learn about ministry. So don't be limited by thinking only this model works, right? Outsourcing. Rick talked about this too, but there's so much outsourcing you could do. You could buy HR documents. There's plenty of entities that you could have look at your processes, your hiring documentation. They can manage all those things for you. What was the corporation site you mentioned, the Intuit? MyCorporation.com, where you could have, anyway, there's a lot of sites and a lot of resources out there. Generosity is important. What do I mean by that? Don't be ashamed to ask. And if you're not a senior pastor, and if you're a children's pastor, and you have a camp coming up, there's no reason you can't ask people to fund those kids going to camp. I mean, you got to submit to your senior leader, but ask. People want to help. People would love to give $100 to see another child go up to camp and accept Jesus. But if you don't talk about it, they don't know. There's no way they're gonna know about it. There's a great book called The Blessed Life. If you haven't read it, I'd recommend it. Robert Morris. Depending on the community that you're in, financial stewardship is hugely important in the community today. A friend of mine, Pastor Mike in Hawaii, has a pretty large congregation. But in Hawaii, though a lot of people can't afford a home, what they do afford is a new car every 2 to 3 years. So there's a lot of money that goes in that culture, from what Pastor Mike has shared, that people continue to buy a new car because it's a prestige symbol. Well, they're upside down financially, those people. But it's so part of the ingrained culture of that community that they just do it anyway, or they've been doing it for years. So they engaged Financial Peace University. They brought in Dave Ramsey's material, which is really great material. They started discipling it and training it, and it's really transformed the church just by engaging it. So I say that under financial, that if you see financial issues in the people who are in the church, help, right? And there's great programs out there. Crown Ministry is a great discipleship program. So teach personal stewardship, teach personal discipleship. Capital campaigns, they're not all about buildings. There's a lot of capital campaigns for missional purposes. There's capital campaigns to buy a new sound system. There's capital campaigns to send a group of kids to camp. There's capital campaigns that aren't driven by brick and mortar assets. When it used to be, you only do capital campaigns to build a building, right? So you could do a campaign for a missional reason. Does that make sense? Okay. So, leadership opportunity must match training. And this is just how to think. Remember, Kim was on the board last night. Kim's not here now, right? But when we look at the model of what Jesus did, he sent out people 2 by 2. And so if we just took that model, that we're not going to let anyone take a position to do anything at our church if they haven't already recruited their apprentice to take over for them in 6 months. What would happen to the church? Growth. Because again, it's not about the work that we need done, though it's great that Kim was on the board and doing the work that Kim was doing yesterday, but it's about Kim investing in somebody else, using it as a discipleship time to invest himself into other people, to hand off and train somebody who maybe is 17, going to college and really wants to learn how to run the board, learn how to use the lighting and the cameras and everything else that's in the room, the sound system. There's kids who want to do that. So if we took an apprentice model and just said the key tools we have are going to go 2 by 2. So in other words, we'll hire people only when they apprentice somebody else. So there's, again, I'm trying to just say some out-of-the-box stuff, that there's things you could implement which aren't based off money, aren't based off size. You could do it with 20 people in the church. Okay? And the big one, when you read especially what Ken Robeson talked about, is using the arts to engage people. Using media, using technology, using everything creative, using painting your children's building, or putting a mural on a wall in the high school room. Is there a reason that local artists can't do that you have in your community? That graffiti gang that you had out there, that you've now engaged in church, what if they did a graffiti wall in your high school area? It's about Jesus, not about what they normally do, right? Again, younger people, what if you engage them to help with your technology? Because you don't know Facebook, and I really don't know where the on button is on the iPhone. It just stops sometimes, right? But younger people do. So engage them, invite them in, and tap into them. Embrace who they are. Next slide. I'm planning a church right now. So one of the first things we're starting is a real aggressive funeral and marriage service. I've engaged some college students, and we're trying to contact all the mortuaries to know we don't care who died. We want to do your service. I don't care what religion they are. We want to be there. I'm okay with whoever they come. They could hate God. Let us come in and let us take care of it. Typically, larger churches tend not to want to do this anymore. Certainly, larger pastors don't want to do a lot of funerals anymore, and they tend not to want to do a lot of marriages over time. But one of the greatest growth areas is to really reach people in their greatest need. I hate to be crass, but we forget that because we really want to create a relevant service with awesome music, and we'll work 20 to 30 hours on our message because we want it sharp and perfect. But there's people in need who are sitting in a cancer ward. There's some people who are in need because their kid just got in an accident, they don't know what to do. And they're sitting at that hospital not knowing who to turn to. Now, again, not that we're ambulance chasers, and I'm not arguing that, but see where people's need is, and as a new entity or as a smaller church, you could be there in ways that larger churches can't be. They could be there maybe for their people, maybe, if they have the time, and they could send somebody possibly, a larger church. But this is an area that if you look at the data, larger churches tend to slip in helping people in crisis in their community because it's just so big. And people don't know who to go to and don't know who to talk to. And as a smaller church, this you could help with and really change people who are in need. Does that make sense? It's not glamorous. It's hospital visitation. It's helping people who are crying and weeping and worried about what's going to happen to their loved one, right? It's just hugging somebody when they don't know where else to go. But they need that. I mean, I need that. We all need that. So, so again, just some honesty. You know, chaplains, it'd be great to be the chaplain of the Lakers or the chaplain of the Trojans, but what about a chaplain at your local hospital where you could plug in? What about a chaplain for your police department or sheriff's department? Just to help the police officers who are caught in whatever hurt they're in, or firemen who are caught in their hurt. Again, those aren't areas that necessarily get a lot of attention, but they're opportunities for us to walk in as deliverers of the gospel to really help. Does that make sense? Yeah? Yeah, okay. So, again, just some ideas here. Christmas giveaways. Can you adopt families in your community? We lived in Burbank and we had Bible study that I was running for like 5 years in our home. But every Christmas we'd adopt 5 to 10 families and do Christmas baskets and gifts. Again, we weren't a big ministry. We didn't do a lot out of the house. It was in our house that we had met for those years while I was working for Foursquare. But it meant something to the people we touched. And there weren't, surprisingly, especially the coordinating council who oversaw that in the city I was in. And the coordinating council is a group of volunteers from all the parachurch and non-church and Muslim organizations and Hindu organizations and all the volunteer groups that come together and try to do something for their community. And it was surprisingly bereft of churches. We would go to those meetings, my wife was part of it, and she'd go to the meeting and just say, there's no pastors who ever go to those. They don't want it. And there was such need there. There was kids who were hurt. There were drug rehab programs that needed help. There was a parade and they needed somebody to clean up after the horses. And the Muslims were there, which is awesome. They didn't mind picking up the horse poop, but there weren't a lot of Christians doing it. So, again, and that sounds critical, and I don't mean to be judgmental. I don't mean that negatively. Just when we were there, we really felt called to do it. And if you're smaller and you're trying to build social equity, there's a ton of ways you could do it. Even picking up poop. Okay? So think about how you could engage your community. Think about how you could partner with different entities that are out there, partner with different ministries, parachurches, Young Life, different things that are happening out there. Next slide. Okay. Last bucket. So those are trends that I had seen. Those are things that are happening in America. We're going to talk about motivation. That's the last thing we're going to talk about. So everyone's here. Yay. Okay, we're done. Are you good with finishing this? Okay. So why is motivation important? Yeah, it keeps us moving forward, right? Because is everybody motivated? No. Right? Are a lot of people not motivated? Do we have a responsibility to carry them? No, right? But we tend to as Christians, but because that's our default, we want to help everybody so long that we're carrying. That's not what we're called to do, but we are called to motivate people to do something different, right? So let's look at the way we do that. We talked about assessment, determination, and deployment. Part of deployment is how we motivate others to deploy. Army is very good at deployment, right? Volunteers typically it's harder to deploy. Next slide. So Motivation 101. Let's just talk about some traditional motivation tools. Everyone know Maslow's theory of motivation, or raise your hand if you've heard of Maslow's theory of motivation. Okay. It used to be taught in sociology. I don't even know if they teach it anymore. But it's that you begin with your basic needs. You have to be fed, you have to be clothed, you have to have some significance, and then eventually you get up to this point of self-actualization. But you can't get there without walking through the ladder, right? So as you build teams and you build leadership and you build people to be connected, the first point is you got to deal with their needs and their basic wants and their bills that they're trying to pay, their mortgage payment, their car payment, the realities of that. And eventually you get to these higher needs, which are into altruism and doing the right thing. But those don't come if you are too worried about putting food on the table, right? So that was typically what you were taught, or at least what I was taught in sociology. Carrot and stick, we've all heard of that, right? What do you do with a carrot? Yeah, dangle it before somebody, and what do you do with the stick? You hit them, right? I mean, that was normal. You kind of learned that in our culture. You learned that was a normal management technique, that we're going to reward people with money. That's the carrot. We're going to reward them with the corner office, reward them with the car that you could drive that's a company car, reward them with a title, reward them with a retirement account, reward them with stock benefits. And if they don't do what you want, then you took those things away, right? So there's reward and punishment and stuff. So money was like this main motivator for getting people to do what you want them to do. Did that work? In general, no, right? I mean, at a certain level it did. Again, if you had need, if you had a mortgage payment that you needed to make, if you had to pay for your kids going through college. There were seasons that it could have an influence over you, but did that build camaraderie? Did that build commitment to the entity? Did that commit, I want to be at this job forever because they're so great to me? No, right? It was more resentment. You did it, okay. So as a church, first of all, we don't want to repeat everything the business world tried to do and it didn't work, right? Because they had a lot more money to do it with. So as a church without much money, we can't use money anyway to be the motivator, right? I mean, could anyone in here use money to motivate staff? Okay, yeah, me either. Right, so you can't use money to motivate staff, so there has to be a way that you motivate volunteers and people around you and engage them and look at it. And there's a lot happening, I think, in the economic world and business world that's pretty inspiring. Next slide. We're going to talk about them. So it's that question back to believing, being, belief, being, and belonging, right? So why do people be? Has anyone read Tom Sawyer? Okay. So what happened with the fence? Tell me the story. Does anyone remember the story about Tom Sawyer? Okay, so what's the story?
He talked him into painting the fence for himself.
Right. And do you remember how he did it?
No. He made him think that it was fun.
He made him think it was fun. He made him think it was special. Yeah. So he told his friends, and it started with Ben, right? But he told his friends, hey, this is the coolest thing in the world to do. Look at the privilege I have in painting. I am so blessed that I'm the one who gets to paint. And these people came along and saw him and said, wait a minute, I want to paint. And they all got the brush, and pretty soon he got everyone else to paint the fence, right? So really good lessons in motivation from Tom Sawyer. Right, that's what we try to do in church. We try to convince people that moving chairs is such an awesome thing to do. Right? And if you show up, you can move chairs with me, and it's really great. Right? And if we're enthusiastic enough, we'll get more people to come do it, because they'll bring their friends to do it. Probably not. Okay, but it worked for Tom Sawyer. So Harvard MBA oath. Can you go to? Never mind. If you write down that somewhere. And when you have time, Google it and go to the actual website. I forgot the website, but basically, and I mentioned it yesterday, but basically these MBA students in 2003 committed to one another and signed an oath that they would do nothing of harm to the environment, to their culture, to people and humanity through the education and commitment to their careers that they were making. So this altruism was creeping into this business focus. And what happened is it grew, and it started at Harvard, and then pretty soon Yale did it, and then pretty soon Stanford did it, and then Penn State did it, and then it became this kind of broad thing that happened. But what's inspiring, that those we thought would have been driven the most by greed, right, are those probably at Ivy League schools going to business school. Those are probably the greediest bunch we could think of, right? Because they're the future politicians, they're the future presidents of our country, they're the future CEOs of corporations, they're the ones who want more and more, right? So they're the ones who said, wait a minute, we're going to do something different. And that's really, in my mind, inspiring, because why would they do that? Why would they be committed to something else other than just getting the most I could get for my job, milking the most I could get of money and stock benefits for what I'm doing? So there's something happening that's a little, in my mind, different. That's happening. Israel Daycare Center. These are just some examples. There was a study done. This I have a Dan Pink book, but there was a study done in Israel of a daycare center, and the daycare center had a real problem with the parents being late in picking up the kids. So, just as a guess, if that was you and you're running the daycare center, what would you do to stop the parents from being late?
Charge them more.
You charge them more, right? Right? Okay. So they did that. They said, okay, we're going to charge this much for If you're 5 minutes late, you're going to pay for the next hour. And it was a big amount, whatever it was. I mean, percentage-wise, it wasn't small. It wasn't like $10. It was more than they would have paid normally. So what do you think the result of that was? Okay, we would think that. They would be there on time. Okay, so if the time to pick up was 5, and they knew that if they were 5 or 10 minutes late, whatever it was, they were going to have to pay this penalty. But the penalty gave them an hour because they paid for an hour. So actually more people showed up at 6. Okay, because now it's okay and I'm just going to pay for it. You're saying it's okay to be late. And so all I'm saying is money doesn't actually work the way we always think it works, as a motivation and as a deterrent, as a carrot and a stick. So they put other penalties in place, like you're going to get kicked out of the daycare center, and that stopped it. Right? Mass amortization's growing. I mean, this is an old point because it's obvious, but it's remarkable how much design and creativity is happening with a younger generation across this country. I have a degree in economics, but I'm kind of schizophrenic. I have a degree in film and television, so I worked in Hollywood as a writer. And filmmaking right now, if you go to Vimeo and some of, even YouTube, you can find a lot. There's incredible films being made by people who are never going to film school, who are working off of cameras and digitally altering what they're filming from a video camera that makes it look like they're shooting on 35 millimeter film, with a level of quality in acting, with a level of quality of lighting, with a level of quality of design and costumes and storytelling that's as significant as anything we found in film school 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It's just changing, right? So what if you did something really remarkable? So if you're a children's pastor, been a children's pastor, raise your hand. There's no children's pastors? Okay, you've been children's. Okay, so what if you go in, you got your high school group, and what your answer is, hey, we're going to do this great thing, and we're going to reach out, and what I want you guys to do is take a parable and film a video. You pick it, I don't care what it is, but create a story. And we're going to then watch them over the next few weeks. And let your youth group create it. Let your engage them around something of what they know, of what they're interested in. Let them engage with the gospel in a remarkable way with the tools they have available to them. I think there's so much opportunity because of this amateurization that's happening, right? Who owns Wikipedia? Yeah, just everyone raise their hand. Yeah, we all own we own Wikipedia, right? Okay. So is Wikipedia liberal or conservative? What's your guess? No, both, okay. Oh, Ricky, no, you're not supposed to answer. Okay, so Wikipedia, Regent University. Pat Robertson, Christian, CBN, Christian University, did a study of Wikipedia and compared it to Encyclopedia Britannica and a couple of the printed encyclopedias on topics that were conservative: gun control, conservative politics, Christianity, salvation, some very specific Christian, the Trinity. What they found was Wikipedia was more conservative in what they presented. With the world out there, the world is what the world is. And again, everyone, raise your hand again, we all own it. But so does everyone in San Francisco, right? Right. So we all own it. And we're the ones editing it. So because of the power law and how it operates, and I'll explain that in a minute, they found it more conservative than any of the printed material edited by professional editors who created the subject material and the subject they were experts at. So the self-editing that happened on Wikipedia by people who cared, because it's kind of like the 80-20 or the 90-10 law in giving. It's not a law, and I hate to speak it as a curse, but typically, right, 80% of your giving comes from 20% of your people. Some churches, 90% of your giving comes from 10% of your people. A great church, that's spread out, 60% of the giving comes from 40% of the people. You're not relying on certain key donors. there's a broad base of support. Well, with the power law, what happens is, with Wikipedia, those who are interested in that topic, whatever that topic are making 90% of the posts to whatever, and editing whatever that is. So as a church, where we could, again, disengage pretty quickly with technology because we don't think it's very savvy or very conservative or very Christian, we could tackle topics as a church, and a youth group of 10 kids could pick the topic, eternal life as a subject in Wikipedia. And with the power law, they could control what that definition is and what everyone in the world would get if they went to Wikipedia because of how it's managed and how it's done. So there's incredible opportunity to engage around these topics and to start really sharing the gospel and going to 10 million people with it by just simply engaging the people with the mission that we're about through technology, through creativity. Make sense? Okay. Tribalism is something that's on the rise. What I mean by, when I grew up, and I don't know how you guys were, but there were cliques. There were the jocks and the freaks and the smokers and the non-smokers. And I was in Denver, so there were cowboys and cheerleaders and all these different groups that tended to stay together, right? Seth Godin wrote a really good little book, but one thing he observed both in high school and then especially when you get to college is that those cliques that form aren't over the things they used to form about. So people engage and tribes are forming around a topic. Let's say people are interested in social justice. So they're forming this clique and this tribe around social justice, which may include 3 Christians, 2 gay kids, a couple of multi-ethnicities. People, when I grew up, you wouldn't imagine them sitting in a room together. So what's created a real challenge, and we see it in the church, to engage the youth groups with that is, if you invite people to church and say something or not include members of their tribe, they don't know really what to do with church. Because typically, I'll invite members of my tribe to something that inspires me, right? That's what we do. I like those people. Hey, come to church, check it out with me, it's really great. Well, if I have 2 gay friends, am I going to invite them to church? I don't know. I don't know how my church is going to receive the gay kids. Now, again, pastors, do we want the gay kids to come to church? Okay, repeat that. Do we want the gay kids to come to church? Right, we do, right? Of course, because we want them to get saved and we want them to come. But how do we receive them? How do they come in and feel engaged and part of what we do? I hate to say not condemned, but loved, but taught the truth. And that's hard to do. And it's just magnified in this tribalism. So again, it's just something that's out there and it's in all the writing. Everything's happening. Keep going. You put it all up. I think I mentioned this last night. We tend to disengage from culture. There's a historical truth that we tend to disengage from anything that looks bad and doesn't fit within the context of who we are as a church. And these are all examples of things we stepped out of, which I think possibly we conceded ground on and had to gain it back. Because I don't think rock and roll is something we've now lost as a Christian church. It's part of the mainstream. You could still love rock and roll and be a Christian, right? There was a time, was that possible? No, you really didn't fit if you were a rock and roll loving Christian. You had to go to some pretty funky churches to do that. Maybe you were a Chuck Smith church. So again, you could disengage from the internet. I put up this thing, Johannes of Trismius. He wrote a book called The Praise of Scribes. He printed it on a printing press, saying how we need to protect the scribes and protect everything we did. Did it work? No. No. Scribes are gone. There's not scribes anymore. But he wanted the scribe lifestyle to be held on to. And I bring all that up just to say we've got to be really careful with not engaging with stuff because we lose people anytime we don't disengage with them. Make sense? Okay, next slide. So just a couple of examples of things that are motivating the world right now. What's happening? Have you heard of these companies, Alasians? Okay, they have something called 20% time. What's that mean? The 20% of the time they come into their office. 80% of the time they work at home, or work at Starbucks, or work at a football game, or work at a Laker game, or work wherever they want to work, because all they really care about is what they produce. They're not going to manage their time and their minutes. Zappos was brilliant because it looked at the population in the United States, and as everyone was sending all the phone calls to India and outsourcing overseas, all the phone services, the leaders at Zappos looked at it and said, we have all these brilliant women who had kids and have MBAs and are really smart, but they decided to have children and they're sitting at home. What if we had a job that they could do at home? And so they set up a computer. They gave them all Ethernet connections. They gave them a good phone line and an ear jack so that they could multitask while they're taking a phone call for Zappos. And basically, they let them work at home. Did that breed loyalty? Absolutely. You've just engaged and endorsed my life and given me a job that I could work at. Encarta versus Wikipedia, it's an old story. Does everyone remember? Does anyone remember Encarta? Okay. Yeah, it was Microsoft invested millions in, it was a little CD you would get whenever you bought Microsoft Works or whatever, Encarta, which was a disk encyclopedia. Again, millions and millions and millions of dollars were poured into it. It was cool. It had good graphics, good technology. It had video attached. You'd point and click. It was like, okay, that's the wave of the future. That's what encyclopedias are going to be. At the same time, they started Wikipedia. And how did Wikipedia start? Well, just these group of guys said, hey, let's put it out there. And they said, who are the editors? No, nobody's going to edit it. Who's going to own it? No, nobody's going to own it. And this is going to work? Yeah. And so they started testing it, and people started editing it, and people started investing their time. And what they found that people who really cared about it spent a lot of time doing it, and those who didn't just did other stuff. And so suddenly, Wikipedia did what? Yeah. Because who's heard of Encarta? Yeah, that's the point. Right. It's gone. So results-only work environments, which again are environments that are moving towards let's just look at what we need you to, the results we want out of you. Again, back to that example we used last night, I don't need to micromanage you. I don't care what you do with your time, what you do with your hours, what you do with your kids' football games, basketball games, lifestyle, church. You just get what I need done and what I pay you to do, and I'll pay you to get those results. Is that effective? Yeah, more and more. So green organizations are another example, which is self-evident what those are environmentally. Next slide. I'm almost done. I'm hurrying. So I talked about the power law already, talked about that's kind of the 80-20 law that's happening, and you see it online. You see it on Twitter. You see it on, what's the photo sharing site, Flickr? Is it Flickr? Yeah. You see it on there, where those posts are happening. Again, there's certain topics that people just get into and control that topic because that's what they're interested in. Wikipedia, you see it in 80-20 in the church. There's really funny stuff happening. This is where I put this Isser Shrine because I came across this article about it, and it really surprised me. But it's a 1,300-year-old shrine that signed up to be recognized by the UN Authority of Antiquities as an antique, whatever, an antiquity for the world. So they signed up and they were denied. And why were they denied? Because every 120 years, they're part of the force, the same force that has been there for how many centuries? But the wood, it gets destroyed by termites. So every 120 years, the Shinto priests rebuild that shrine out of the same forest and the same wood that had been happening for 1,300 years. But they were denied because they changed the wood. Even though it's the same architectural design, the same. And so just, again, things happen that are just different. And what I liked about the story is, well, we could get that way. We could start thinking it's only going to be an antiquity if it's this or that, or it's only going to be truth if it's this, that, and the. But sometimes things show up, new wineskins show up, they're completely paradigm shifting for us. And we got to be open to that. Next slide. So, this is the last one. So if you haven't read anything by Daniel Pink, I'd recommend a book called Drive, which is a great book on motivation. What he proposes is something called autonomy, mastery, and purpose. That what you do is you motivate people, is one, you set up a structure that they're autonomous in how they get done what they need done. You let them get better at what they do and become a master of what you've hired them to do. And you make sure they understand the purpose of why they're doing it. Your focus is on the purpose. Again, back to that thing we talked about last night, or we did last night where we all crossed the line. Right. The purpose is what I wanted to make sure everybody had. But if you have the purpose, you need the autonomy to accomplish what you need to accomplish. And then as you have the freedom to make mistakes, to get better, you'll become a master at whatever that is. And once you're a master at whatever that is, like at the soundboard, then you could train somebody else. And you could have apprentices under you. And you could raise people up to do it. Right? So those are really important things. Let people define their own how. You lead the what. A mastery, let people get better on their own. Don't need to carrot and stick them to death. And purpose, let them understand their purpose. Talk about the why, not just the task, but the person. And knowing that the Imago Dei is going to be coming out of the individual. And there's these two other frames of thought happening. Positive psychology talks about the same thing, pleasant life, good life, meaningful life. Rick Warren wrote a book that talks about the same thing, self-responsibility, self-betterment, an answer to the why. It all frames the same thing of creating a discipleship structure that lets people be all God's called them to be, and free to make mistakes, and free to grow, and free to experience who they are in Christ. And that's really what we're called to do as a church. Amen?